Hello friends, welcome back to my channel again. Today we are going to see some standalone fantasy recommendations. If you are a fantasy reader, you might know that how scary it is to commit to a series that has 600 to 700 pages on average for each book and that has some 10 to 15 installments. I have been worried sick to commit to a series. In those times, the standalone fantasies have always helped me. So I hope that this recommendation will help you also. And if you are a beginner in fantasy world, I suggest that you read the standalone fantasies first to just dip your toe and see how it is. Without further ado, let's get into the recommendations. So the first recommendation is a book that I read in a single sitting because I wanted to know what the hell is happening in that book. The book that I'm talking about is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Susanna Clarke has immediately become one of the favorite authors of all time now because this book just blew my mind. It's kind of difficult to explain you what this book is about because you're not supposed to know anything before you read it. But trust me, until half of the book, you will never know what is happening. There will be a threshold point after half of the book that will just make you realize what you have been reading so far and what is going to happen next. So this story follows a guy called Piranesi and one more called the Other. There are only two people in this world, and the house that the Piranesi is living in kind of unending. It is extensive, it is infinite, it keeps on growing. Some part of the house is flooded, some part of the house has some wild animals, it is enchanted. He's trying to figure out along with us what is happening, and he's going to document everything that he's seeing every day and make sense of it. And once he makes sense of it, it will just blow your mind. So this is a very short book, very perfect for beginners. If you're trying to get into fantasy, this would be the book for you. So the next two books that I want to recommend you are both from the same author, Seanan Mcguire. I discovered this author a few years back and it is, the writing style really blew my mind. The first book that I want to recommend you is called The Middle Game. I read it as an audiobook. So this story follows twins, Roger and Dodger, and both of them are created by their dad just to make gods out of them. So this is a kind of genre blending story with sci-fi elements and fantasy into it. And in the very first page, they kind of tell you that the world is going to end. That is how the story starts. So I was immediately sucked in, and the very fast storytelling and the narrative style was so good that you would want to finish that in a single sitting. There is also a kind of fantasy tale woven into the story where there is a fantasy world and the twins are getting into that fantasy world. And that is a kind of a parallel story that also happens, and the sci-fi part of the story also happens. It is all very well balanced and well done. I loved that book and I kept thinking about that book because it was written so well. So if you are interested in sci-fi-ish fantasies, then this book is for you. So the next book by the same author is Every Heart a Doorway. This is technically a series, but every book is individual on its own. It has its own story. You can read those books out of the order, so you just don't have to worry and pick any book of the series. But the only book that I read in that series is the Every Heart a Doorway. So this book follows all the children who have been to other worlds, like children from Narnia, if they are coming back to the world, and Alice who's gone to Wonderland and has come back. And these people are finding it very difficult to adjust to the reality now. Like, for example, in Narnia, they go to the Narnia world and they grew up as older kids and then they come back as young kids. So this is kind of traumatic if you think about. So there is a school where there is a rehabilitation for these kind of children, and there is a murder happening there. And the principal of the school is also someone who has already gone to other worlds, and it is all such a magical time. This is a novella, it's very short, and I'm sure that you will love it if you read it. The next book that I want to suggest is a book that I read almost 3-4 years back, and it is still hanging at the back of my head, and that is Kingdom of Back by Mary Lou. This is a story of Mozart's sister, and I think she was also equally talented, but she never got to have that spotlight on her because she is a woman and she was forbidden to do music. But she loved composing and she was technically a little bit better than Mozart, it seems. So this story is about their childhood, and she kind of meets a stranger halfway through the book, and he promises to make her heard and seen in the musical world, and that seems to be having a very dangerous turn of events. So they go on to a world where everything is backwards, like the roots of the trees are out and the tree itself is inside, something like that, just like how it is depicted in the picture. So it was a very nice story. Overall, it was a great fantasy. but the fantasy element was not over the top, and it is manageable world building, and it was very good to read it. The next book is for all the romance readers out there, because this had the purest and funniest and heartwarming romance in the book. I'm talking about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by VE Schwab. This, I think you might have already heard about this book multiple times on my channel. I loved it. I loved it so much that I'm recommending it to you until you read it. So this book follows Addie LaRue, and her parents are managing a arranged marriage for her, but she is not interested. She just wants to explore the world. She wants to know more about it. She doesn't want to get married. So she strikes a deal with a devil, and that devil, in exchange of what she's asking, he gives her an eternal life, but no one will remember her. Everyone who will talk to her will immediately forget her the moment they turn their back to her. So this is the story, and years later, like centuries later, one guy finally remembers her, and the story takes off from there. It is such a wonderful romance with a fantasy world, and I love the conversation between Addie LaRue and the devil, who keeps on coming and going in the entire story. It is such a good time. This is the only book that I've read from VE Schwab, and this was, I think, the best book that I read with fantasy and romance, such a romantasy story. The next book that I want to talk to you about is Starless by Erin Morgenstern. Right off the bat, let me tell you that I did not like this book just because I couldn't understand what was going on in it. It was so abstract, but there are so many quotes in this book that I did wanted to tattoo it on myself. It was so beautifully written, so lyrically written. And this had many short stories inside it, all like fairy tale-esque stories, which I loved, but the entire story did not make sense to me. Maybe I'm dumb or anything, I don't know, but I loved the reading experience, but the story was just over my head. And I'm still recommending this because it is such a beautifully written story about stories and books and secret societies. And the story follows Zachary. I think he one day finds on an adventure himself to find a book and ending up in a secret society. And he meets people and they exchange stories. It is all a fun time. I loved reading bits and pieces of this book. If you like abstract writing and things like that, this is the perfect fantasy for you. The next book is the most favorite book of mine for all time, and the author is also such a beloved author. The book is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is the story of the first ever witch, and this is such a beautifully written book. You might have seen this book floating around the internet for a very good reason. It is written very beautifully, and you will just sucked in into the story within just few chapters. So the story follows Circe, and she is the daughter of the sun god, and she kind of doesn't have any talent. So the gods must have some talent, so it makes her an outcast, and her own father hates her just because she's not beautiful enough and she doesn't have any talents. And later she finds that if you mix certain elements in the nature, she can create magic. And that is kind of forbidden because magic is something you are born into, nothing you can acquire, because that will be degrading the gods. So that is the storyline. So he is sending her off to an island, to an exile, and the rest of the story takes place in that island. Odysseus comes to meet her. You know, it's such a magical, whimsical, and atmospheric story of fantasy, witchcraft, and mythology. So please do check this book out. This is such a wonderful book. So the next book that I want to talk about is a book that I have already spoken about for a zillion times, I think, and that is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is one of my very favorite books of all time. When I think about this book, I immediately get into the snow-filled Moscow, Siberian, Russian vibes, and the folklore and everything is so atmospheric. So the story follows Mariam and Irina. Mariam is the daughter of a moneylender who is kind of unsuccessful and he's not able to manage his business well. So Mariam kind of takes over, and she is so successful that she attracts the attention of the Winter Knight, who's kind of wanting her to make silver into gold. So this is the storyline of Mariam, and Irina is kind of fond of to an arranged marriage with a Tsar, and that Tsar is kind of monstrous. So what these two girls are going to do with their lives and their life-threatening immediate threats. So that is the story about. It is about friendship, it is about family, it is about love, it is about fairy tale. This story is a loose retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, which is my favorite fairy tale of all the fairy tales out there. And I loved it for the same reason, and I hope you will also love it if you read it. I just realized that my all-time favorite books are all fantasy books, because the next book that I want to suggest you is also one of my all-time favorite, and that is The Inheritance of Arcadia Divina by Zoraida Cordova. This story is such a genre blending story. It has fantasy, it has magical realism, it has action, it has everything that you can think of. It has some historical elements too, and it is everything that you can think of. This story follows the Montoya family, and the eldest of the family is Orquidea Divina, and one day she sends letters to all her relatives to come and collect their inheritance because she is dying. And when every one of the family members come and see her, she is kind of turning into a tree, and they have to figure out what is the mystery surrounded their family for so long, and how did they happen to have magic in the family. And meanwhile, one strange man of unknown identity, he is trying to just kill everyone from the Montoya family because of some reason that they have to figure out. And it has everything that you need. At one point, literally, there is a skeleton that comes and speaks to you, which was very hilarious and funny. It was not horrifying, but it was very funny, and I loved all the bits. And the moment you think that the story is a little bit dragging down, but it will just sweep you off your feet again, and it will take another route, and it will just go to another place, and it will tell you a very different story. It is really, really very good, very fun, and I like family dramas in books, so I love this so much, and I hope you will love it too. The last book that I want to suggest is the book that I'm currently reading, and I am kind of 100 pages into it, and I immediately started loving it, so that I wanted to recommend you this book too. The book is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. How can a fantasy recommendation cannot have Brandon Sanderson in it? But this is my first time reading Brandon Sanderson, and I immediately was captivated by his writing style and the kind of world building he does with the biochromatic magic system. Everything was really very good. And I have heard that Brandon Sanderson does really good payoffs at the end, like the story slowly builds up, and the end of the book, it will be very huge and very massive and very powerful. I'm already loving what I'm reading. I don't know how much better it gets. So I think I'm going to enjoy this. If you're looking for something from Brandon Sanderson that is not a series but just a standalone, this book would be it. I also wanted to read the Mistborn series, the Way of King, the Stormlight Archive, everything, but they are all huge series with each book having 500 to 600 pages, and I am a little bit intimidated to commit to. But this book is a standalone. I want to just dip my toes into the Cosmere world and see how it is. So far, I'm loving it, and I hope this will never disappoint me, and I think you will also enjoy it too. So that is it, guys. These are all the books that I wanted to share with you today. I hope these were all very useful for you. And as always, please do comment in the sections that what are your favorite fantasy standalones and the things that I should check out. And if you have read anything from my recommendation and just anything bookish, just talk to me. I would love to chat with you all. Until I see you again with the very next video with a bookish content, this is Sushmita signing off.